Chapter 2. The Gilded Cage. The ornate carriage that carried Alexei to Lost Vale Academy was more luxurious than any dwelling she'd ever inhabited. Velvet cushions, gold-trimmed windows, and the subtle hum of protective enchantments made her feel like a wild animal trapped in a jeweled cage. She kept her hands firmly on her daggers, the familiar wake grounding her as the landscape outside transformed from rugged wilderness to manicured perfection. When the academy finally came into view, Alexei's breath caught despite herself. Lost Vale Academy rose from the heart of a pristine valley, like something from a fairy tale. Soaring spires of white marble reached toward the sky, their surfaces carved with intricate runes that pulsed with soft magical light. Vast gardens spread between elegant buildings, where students in immaculate uniforms moved with the casual grace of those born to privilege. Everything gleamed with wealth and power. Impressive, isn't it? The guild liaison sitting across from her, a nervous man named Hartwell, adjusted his spectacles. The academy has trained the finest hunters in the kingdom for over 3 centuries. Alexei said nothing, but her silver eyes tracked every detail. Guard positions, escape routes, potential hiding spots. Joshua's training had been thorough. Always assess your environment, always plan for the worst. The carriage rolled through gates that could have housed dragons, past fountains that danced with enchanted water, until it finally stopped before the academy's main entrance. Students paused in their conversations to stare as Alexei emerged, their curious gazes taking in her practical leather armor and the twin daggers at her thighs. She felt like a wolf among sheep, Miss Ira, Hartwell said nervously. Perhaps you'd like to change into something more appropriate before meeting the dean. Alexei's hand moved instinctively to her weapon hilts. This is appropriate for me. The man's face flushed red, but he said nothing more as they climbed the marble steps into the academy's grand foyer. The space was vast enough to house her entire mountain hideout, with a ceiling painted to depict legendary hunters slaying mythical beasts. Everything spoke of tradition, power, and old money. Ah, you must be our new transfer student. The voice was cultured, authoritative, and carried the unmistakable accent of nobility. Alexei turned to see a tall, elegant woman approaching them. Dean Marceline Ashworth wore robes of deep blue silk that probably cost more than most people earned in a year, and her graying hair was arranged in a style that spoke of hours spent with expensive stylists. Dean Ashworth, Hartwell said quickly, "May I present Alexei Mixie Ira, our special admission?" The dean's keen eyes assessed Alexei with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to reading people instantly. "Special indeed. Your entrance examination scores were quite remarkable, Miss Ira. Though I understand your educational background is somewhat unconventional. I was taught by someone who survived what your graduates read about in books," Alexei replied flatly. A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, crossed the dean's features. How refreshing! Most of our students are so concerned with propriety, they forget the purpose of their education. She gestured toward the grand staircase. "Shall we discuss your class placement?" As they walked through the academy's corridors, Alexei noticed the way other students moved aside to let the dean pass. The respect wasn't just for authority, it was tinged with fear. These privileged children understood hierarchy, even if they'd never faced a real predator. "Tell me, Miss Ira," Dean Ashworth said as they climbed toward her office, "what do you hope to accomplish during your time here?" "Find out who's making students disappear and kill them," Alexei thought. Aloud, she said, "I want to learn how to be a better hunter." "Admirable, though I suspect you'll find our methods quite different from whatever training you've received." The dean paused at an ornate door marked with protective wounds. "Our students come from the finest families in the kingdom. They've been raised with certain expectations." The office beyond was a study in refined taste. Ancient tomes lined the walls, artifacts from legendary hunts were displayed in glass cases, and portraits of previous deans watched from their frames with painted eyes. Dean Ashworth settled behind a desk that looked older than the academy itself. "Your dormitory assignment and class schedule," she said, sliding a folder across the polished wood. "I've placed you in advanced combat courses, given your practical experience. However, you'll also be required to attend classes in history, etiquette, and theoretical demonology." Alexei opened the folder, scanning the schedule. Etiquette. Our graduates are expected to move in the highest circles of society. They must be warriors, yes, but also diplomats and leaders. The dean's smile was sharp. I trust you'll adapt quickly. Monsters within the walls, Joshua had said. Looking at the dean's calculating expression, Alexei wondered if she was already meeting one of them. An hour later, Alexei stood in the doorway of what would be her dormitory room for the foreseeable future. The space was larger than the entire common area of her mountain hideout, with furniture that probably cost more than most people's homes. Her roommate, a slight girl with nervous eyes named Petra, had taken one look at Alexei's weapons and found urgent business elsewhere. Alexei set her few possessions on the bed closest to the window. Always have an escape route, she was testing the window's latch when voices in the corridor caught her attention. Did you see the new girl? The voice was male, carrying the lazy arrogance of inherited privilege, dressed like a common sellsword. I heard she's some kind of charity case, another voice replied. Father says the guild is getting desperate if they're recruiting from the gutter. Alexei's hand moved to her daggers, the familiar weight steadying her rising anger. But Joshua's voice echoed in her memory. Pick your battles. Intermation first, violence last. She stepped into the corridor to find 3 students in pristine academy uniforms. The speaker was a lean boy with perfectly styled auburn hair and expensive accessories that marked him as nobility. His companions flanked him like loyal hounds, their postures radiating the confidence of those who'd never faced consequences for their actions. You must be the transfer student, the auburn-haired boy said, looking Alexei up and down with obvious disdain. I'm Marcus Aldridge. My family has been attending this academy for 6 generations. Congratulations, Alexei replied flatly. Marcus's smile faltered at her tone. Perhaps no one explained the social structure here. There are certain hierarchies that must be respected. The only hierarchy I recognize is predator and prey. Alexei's silver eyes locked onto his. Which one are you? The temperature in the corridor seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus's companions shifted nervously, but the boy himself straightened with wounded pride. We'll see how long that attitude lasts, he said coldly. The academy has ways of teaching proper respect. As they walked away, Alexei heard one of his companions whisper, Should we tell Kaylin about her? The name meant nothing to Alexei, but something in the way it was spoken, with a mixture of respect and fear, made her file it away for later consideration. The next morning brought her first combat evaluation, held in a training facility that looked more like a palace ballroom than a place of war. Polished floors reflected the light from crystal chandeliers, while enchanted weapons racks lined the walls like pieces of art. Students gathered in small groups, their conversations creating a gentle murmur that spoke of civilization and refinement. Alexei felt like a barbarian at a tea party. Today, we'll be conducting individual assessments, announced the combat instructor, a stern woman named Captain Reeves. Each student will demonstrate their skills against a training construct. Remember, this is about technique and form, not brute force. One by one, students stepped forward to face opponents that were clearly designed to test specific skills rather than pose any real threat. Their movements were precise, elegant, and utterly predictable. Alexei watched them dance through choreographed combat sequences and felt her impatience growing. When her turn came, she approached the training circle with the fluid grace of a predator. The construct, a humanoid figure wreathed in magical energy, moved to attack with textbook precision. Alexei didn't bother with textbooks. She rolled under the construct's first strike, her daggers appearing in her hands as if by magic. The crimson glow that marked her blood bond blazed to life, and suddenly she wasn't in a refined training facility anymore. She was back in the wilderness, where hesitation meant death and pretty techniques were luxuries no one could afford. Her first dagger found the construct's throat while her second opened its side. She spun away from its retaliatory strike, using its own momentum against it as she severed the magical conduits that powered its limbs. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds. The construct collapsed, its magical essence dissipating into sparks of light. The training hall had gone completely silent. By the ancestors, someone whispered, Did you see how fast she moved? That wasn't technique, another student murmured. That was primal. Captain Reeves stared at Alexei with wide eyes, Miss Ira, that was highly unconventional. It was effective, Alexei replied, sheathing her daggers. The crimson glow faded, but she could feel the blood bond humming with residual energy. Indeed, the new voice cut through the whispers like a blade through silk, though perhaps a bit crude for civilized company. Alexei turned to see a young man stepping through the crowd of students who parted before him like courtiers making way for royalty. He was tall and lean, with silver hair that caught the light and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. His academy uniform was perfect, from the crisp lines of his jacket to the family crest embroidered on his chest. Everything about him screamed nobility, power, and absolute confidence in his own superiority. Kalen Vorsung, he said with a slight bow that managed to be both polite and condescending. Perhaps you'd care for a proper demonstration of academy technique. The challenge in his voice was unmistakable, as was the mixture of curiosity and disdain in his gaze. This was the boy Marcus's companion had mentioned, clearly someone of importance, someone accustomed to being the center of attention. I don't need a demonstration, Alexei replied. I need opponents who won't fall apart at the first touch of real combat. Kalen's smile was sharp as winter steel. How interesting! Most students are eager to learn from their betters. Then find me some betters to learn from. The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Around them, students whispered among themselves, their excitement palpable. Alexei could see the social dynamics at work. Kalen was clearly at the top of whatever hierarchy governed this place, and she had just publicly challenged him. Perhaps Kalen said softly, "We should continue this conversation in a more private setting. After all, some lessons are best learned away from an audience." The threat was elegantly phrased but unmistakable. Alexei felt her blood bond respond to the challenge, her daggers seeming to hum in their sheaths. "I look forward to it," she replied. As Kylan walked away, his followers trailing behind him like loyal hounds, Alexei wondered if she'd just made her first enemy at the academy. But then she remembered the missing students, the conspiracy that had brought her here, and Joshua's warning about monsters within the walls. If Kalin Vorsong was one of those monsters, she'd deal with him the same way she dealt with all predators, swiftly and without mercy. The gilded cage might be beautiful, but Alexei Ira had never been meant for captivity.